Ever wondered what ergodic literature might be? Or maybe you want to hear some more about one of my top 5 authors? Well, watch the video. Hello and welcome back everybody, and actually a very extra special and warm welcome to all my new subscribers. Since the last video, this channel has almost exploded. There are so many new people who have subscribed, and I can't even start to express my thanks and my appreciation for really all of you new and old subscribers. So big thank you for anybody who has subscribed, liked, watched all of this and supported this channel in some way or another. Thank you everybody. So today I'm sitting next to another big pile of books, and that means that I'm doing another video about fantasy literature, and that brings together kind of like some theme or aspect. And today's video idea came about by talking to Philip Chase last week on Dear Dr. Fantasy. And he had the idea that he said, well, you're a visual artist. Wouldn't it be really wonderful if you would do some videos about fantasy literature and visual art? Now, when we were talking about this, we were talking more on the lines of fan art and visual art in the sense of painting or things like that. Since then I've sat down a little bit and thought, right, what could I actually do with that idea? Because there are, of course, innumerous ways of how fantasy literature and art are combined, intersect. Like we have TV series like The Wheel of Time that was just released recently. There are manga. At the moment, Berserk and Vinland Saga seem to be extremely popular on Fantasy BookTube. There are video games like the Witcher games. There are films like Dune or The Green Knight. There are films that are based on books like the two that I just mentioned, but there are also films that go the other way around, like Pan's Labyrinth from 2006 by Guillermo del Toro, who then afterwards teamed up with the German fantasy and children's book author Cornelia Funke and released a book in 2019 based on the film. So in this example, the film was first. But there are, of course, other means of how fantasy literature and visual arts or visual elements are coming together. So I went to the shelf and had a look and thought, okay, what do I actually have that I can use to illustrate this idea a little bit more? Fantasy books that, use something visual. Now, for this, we can go way back. The examples that I mentioned so far were all quite contemporary. A lot of them used electronic media. And I think it's safe to say that, if there is a visual medium, that it most likely has been used to tell a fantasy story. But we can, of course, go way back. And my first example is actually from the Middle Ages. And it's the aforementioned Green Knight. Now, we can have this in a modern edition, like this one here. This is the Penguin Classic Edition. And when we have a look inside, it looks like any other book that we're familiar with. So nothing much visual happening, actually. We have a normal text layout. We have kind of like different paragraphs. In this edition, we also have a lot of glossary to explain to a modern reader the Middle English language, so that kind of to help with understanding the text. But this would have been very different in the Middle Ages. You wouldn't have any paragraphs. Instead, you would have nice initials, because Medieval texts were written on vellum, which is basically animal skin, either from sheep or cows. Yeah, I know, doesn't sound really great, but that would have been used to, yeah, write those manuscripts on. And it would have been extremely expensive and valuable. So a scribe would try to put as much text on a page that was possible. So they wouldn't waste a whole line or just even half a line to have a paragraph when something new was starting. So instead they would put in, yeah, those initials, and they could be quite elaborate, like in the manuscript of the Green Knight, or they could be much, much plainer, just a normal letter in a different color, like a red or blue. And it depended enormously on, yeah, how much money the patron who commissions the manuscript was willing to spend on this. So as a rule of thumb, the more money, the more bling you would get in your manuscript then in the end. But the Green Knight also comes with lovely illustrations, and I picked this one here, which shows the moment after Sir Gawain has beheaded the Green Knight, and we see Sir Gawain with a vicious looking axe in his hand, and the Green Knight still on his horse and holding up his own head. So this is probably the most common way how we find fantasy literature and visual elements come together in form of illustration. No? And we find in numerous fantasy books that come with illustrations. Even today we have a lot of actually special collector's editions that come with wonderful illustrations. So it's a very common way of bringing, yeah, something visual towards a fantasy text. My next example is a little bit different because it's a fantasy author who also did his own illustrations, and that's of course J.R.R. Tolkien. So I have this little book here called Tolkien's Treasures, edited by Catherine McIlwaine, and it has a collection of some of Tolkien's illustrations. Tolkien was extremely prolific as a visual artist. He created numerous illustrations for his Middle-earth texts. There are over 100 watercolors alone, and this is just one medium he used. There are ink drawings, there are colored pencil drawings. So he used different media for his drawings and paintings, and he did a lot of them. And it's not just illustrations and paintings that he did, but anybody who has read a Tolkien book, of course, knows it comes with maps. So he designed maps for his texts. And as I say, he designed illustrations for his texts. Like for example this one here. This is a black and white ink drawing, and it seems to be inspired by Aubrey Beardsley, a late 19th century artist. So we have this. This is actually the Trolls, so it's from The Hobbit. But we also have other more ornamental drawings and pages from him, like this one here. And this is called the Tree of Emelian. And when we actually, especially in its enlarged form, it's very reminiscent of William Morris and William Morris textiles or wallpaper designs. And William Morris, of course, again, late 19th century artist belonging to the arts and craft movement. And Tolkien was very inspired by him, not just when it comes to his visual work, but also when it comes to his texts and his writing. And the last example, perhaps this is quite well known. This is again from The Hobbit, Conversation with Smoke. and this is one of his watercolors. So Tolkien basically creating a whole visual world to go with his imagined world of Middle Earth. No? So in this case, the author provides us with a lot of visual material that then enhances his world building, so to say. Again, this is not so exceptional that we have fantasy authors who also illustrate their own books. A more newer example would be Jenny Woods, who has done a lot of her own not so much illustrations, but more like cover designs. That's where you can find her art, for example. My next example is a tiny bit different, and this is Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And this text does two things. It was published in 1865, and there came already with 42 illustrations done by Tenniel. And so it has conventional illustrations, like, for example, this one here, where we see the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. It's, again, a very kind of like well-known illustration. But Lewis Carroll does something different as well in this text and also in other Alice texts that he has written, like Through the Looking Glass, for example. So the example I picked and want to talk a little bit more about, we find in chapter 3 with the heading A Caucus Race and a Long Tail. And here we have Alice, who has previously met a mouse and now gets to talk to this mouse a little bit more. And she says, "You promised to tell me your history, you know," said Alice. "And why it is you hate C and D," she added in a whisper, half afraid that it would be offend again. "Mine is a long and sad tale," said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" And she kept on puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so that her idea of the tale was something like this. And then we get this page here, and we can see that the text is not following the normal kind like text layout anymore, but has been arranged in something that could be seen as the tail of a mouse. So what happens in this little example is that Alice mistakes tail as in story for tail as in part or body part of a mouse. And we get a visual explanation or illustration of Alice's thought process and this mix-up she has in her head. But something else also happens, because the text that is printed in this form, so the story that the mouse is telling, is about two people suing each other. So they are dragging each other in front of a court. And if you have seen British barristers with their wigs and the little tails that they have, now so we have another kind of like association, so to say, what tail might mean in this context. So this example works on different levels. So we have one level that we find in the book itself, and that is explained to us when we read the story. And then we have, of course, our own associations, so to say, that we bring towards the text and what we might think that the text might mean as well. Now, this type of literature, where we as the reader have to put in an extra effort to read the text because it's printed differently and presented visually in a different form, but also have to work in kind of like, how does this go together with the story that is told to us? This type of literature is called ergodic literature. Now, this is a term that was coined by Espen J. Arsett, and he came up with this word for it in 1997, so relatively recently actually, in a book called Cybertext. And the word itself comes from ancient Greek, ergon meaning word and hodos meaning path. And this is what it describes basically what we as the reader have to do. We have to work to find a path into the text, through the text, and this work Arsett calls actually non-trivial effort. But he also said that those texts have a second element, so to say, and that he says is that there has to be a calculation in their production, meaning that the elements that are brought together are not there just by chance, but that the author must have made a conscious effort what he wants to go into the text and what visual elements he wants to have brought together. So let's look at some other examples that fall into this category of ergodic literature. So my next example is this one here, Rian Hughes, XX, or sometimes also referred to as double X. This is a sci-fi story where a radio telescope detects a message that then is seen as a signal from outer space, from extraterrestrial life, and the novel is very centered around kind like to decode this message, to see what do the people or persons who sent this message actually want. And the novel also comes with this tagline, "The battle for our minds has begun." And this is very much kind like all packed into this book. And it comes with a whole range of different types of visual elements. So we have, for example, just normal illustrations. So things that we have talked about before. So this isn't too different from the illustrations in Alice in Wonderland. But we also get things like pages and pages that are just patterns, like in this sequence here. So one page after another, just giving us different types of patterns that can mean something, might not mean something, will definitely mean something different to anybody who looks at this. So what the reader might make out of this will be very, very different from reader to reader. And it goes on for quite a while, so until then we finally get something that represents a bit more like normal linear text again. So we have this in the text. We have kind of like charts like this one here, illustrating phonetics and how to pronounce certain consonants. And we also have something that's a little bit more like the Alice in Wonderland and the Tale of the Mouse example that we had before, and that is this one here. So in this section, the characters in the book encounter like a force field that seems to invade their heads, invade their thinking, disrupt their thinking. And the more this continues, you can see the more the void in the middle of the pages grows, and the text is pushed more and more outside until there's just very little text, and in the end just one letter in each corner. So again, now a bit like the Alice in Wonderland example, we have an illustration of what is happening in the mind of those people. But this, of course, brings what Alice in Wonderland has started to a completely new level, because Now, the amount of visual material in this book is gigantic. There is barely a page where there isn't anything that is not visual. Some of the visuals are very reminiscent of early 20th century newspapers or art movements like Dadaism, for example. So yeah, there is a lot in here. And this is, I think, an excellent example for what Arset means when he says that we have to put in what he calls non-trivial effort, in the sense of you have to work hard to understand what this book is about, and to kind of like make all those connections between all those different visual elements. Another writer who is quite prolific in this respect and does this a lot, to have his books kind of like infused by visual elements, and also uses non-conventional means of print and representation on the page, is McDanielewski. The most famous example here would be House of Leaves, which I do own, but unfortunately this house here has turned into a building site, and I can't get at that shelf right now. It's packed in kind of like plastic sheeting and has lots of other stuff in front of it, so I didn't dare to go even in there. Instead, I will show you this one here, also by McDanielewski, Only Revolutions. In this book we encounter two POV characters. We have Sam and Haley, and they go on to, one could say, a road trip. So on one level this is an American road trip novel, but it's also partly a love story between Sam and Haley, partly a coming of age story because Sam and Haley are more like teenage age. And we follow them, how they kind of like acquire more and more cars and move from place to place, but they also start to move not just from place to place but also through time, so it has a bit of a fantastical element to it as well. And when we look at this book, we could, for example, start from this end here. If we open it up, we get Only Revolutions, and then we have a title page where it says Only Revolutions by Haley. And if we continue on, we see kind of like that almost every page is laid out in the same manner. We have always two page numbers in a circle. Then we have some main text in a bigger print that kind of like goes the normal direction from top to bottom, but we also have some smaller print text that goes the other direction, so this way up. And we have the same in the margins, where we have more text, one going top to bottom, the other one then again bottom to top. So when we want to read this, we kind of like have to start up here, read this way, then we have to turn this around and then read that way. Now, this text this way does not continue with this text, but does continue on the other side with this text. To make this even more complicated, instead of starting from this side, we can start from this side. And if we do that, we kind of like get the same bit, but now we get Only Revolutions by Sam. And we have the same thing, not the same setup of the pages. Now, if you think that you kind of like say, okay, I just read Haley's story, or in this case Sam's story, I read this bit. When I turn this around, then I get basically what I got from the other end as Haley's story. Not necessarily working like that either. No, so you get a bit the idea how this book works, and it's, I think, a lovely play with the title as well, Only Revolutions, because you have to kind of like do this all the time now and revolve the book and the text to read it. So this is McDanielewski. My next example is different again. This is J.J. Abrams and Dorst's S, or sometimes also known as Ship of Theseus. And this is a bit of a different beast. So I will take it out of this there. So it looks like this then. This is a book that poses as a library book. So we get something that they want us to believe come from a library. So on the spine we have a reference number. When we open this, at the front it says book for loan. So we could get it out of the library if we wanted to. In the back we actually have a page with stamps with in and out dates of people who supposedly have actually taken this book out of the library. And it kind of comes with a cover where we have the title, Ship of Theseus, and then we have an author, V.M. Straker or Straker. And what this book does, it's kind of like weaves 3 different stories into each other. So we have the story of Jennifer and Eric, who are students, and they meet in the library where, of course, Jennifer sees Eric reading this book and leaving it behind, and she gets intrigued and picks it up, and she finds that the book is actually heavily annotated. And what she does now is that she starts to write her own annotation and leaving a message for Eric to find in this book. So this is one story where Jennifer and Eric leave messages to each other in this book in the margins. So when we read those kind of like handwritten things in the margin of this book, we get the story of Jennifer and Eric and what they might have to say to each other. But we of course also have not the normal text in the middle, the Ship of Theseus, and that's the next bit, the second story that's woven into this, because this is basically a fantasy story where a guy gets kidnapped, brought onto a really weird ship with even a weirder crew, and they go onto a quite strange journey that is very disorientating, not just in a spatial sense, but also when it comes to identity and things like that. So that's the second story. And the third is about the writer, V.M. Straker, who's a bit of an enigma. Nobody really knows who he is, what he does, where he lives, and kind of like trying to solve this mystery. Who is this writer is the next kind of like story in this book. So we get basically 3 different storylines all rolled into this thing here. We also get a lot of extra kind of like material that's in here, and I will not show you a lot of this because this might spoil quite a bit on when you want to read this. But there are some letters inserted, there are some things like something that looks like a newspaper cut out in here. There are supposedly postcards in there. So it has a lot of extra visual material in the form of objects that come with this book, and that we as a reader are supposed to engage with, make sense of, relate to the 3 texts or 3 stories that we get in this book. So this already kind of almost pushes into the area of the book as an object, and maybe even as an art object, and then a book telling its story on its material level, so to say, and also incorporating other objects and their material levels into all of this. So this is J.J. Abrams and Dorst. J.J. Abrams, by the way, is a filmmaker, and he has worked on TV series like Star Trek, for example. So quite some, visuals plus fantasy story credentials. So it's not surprising that this is quite complex and interesting to, play around with in some respects even. My next category is a little bit different, and it looks at a couple of graphic novels. And my first example is actually one of my favorite authors. He's definitely in my top 5, and that's Neil Gaiman. Now, Neil Gaiman has different elements to his stories anyway. Even in his more conventional novels, we find other elements woven into. If we look at American Gods, we find a lot of kind of like music examples and music used for the book. But we also have things like this one here, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. In an illustrated edition, this has illustrations by Elise Hurst, and it's lavishly illustrated. So there is barely a page where we don't have some type of illustration in this book. But Neil Gaiman also is known for a graphic novel series, and some people would actually claim that is his masterpiece, and that's of course The Sandman. So The Sandman brings different people together. So the text for this was written by Neil Gaiman, and it's not based on any of his novels, but the text is actually specially written for this graphic novel, or this series of graphic novels, I would have to say. And then the artwork was done by Sam Keith, Mike Dringenberg, and Malcolm Jones III. The colors are Daniel Wotso, the letterer is Todd Klein, and cover art was done by Dave McKean. So here we have a fantasy author teaming up with a team of, basically graphic novel artists to produce then this. And we see kind of like inside, this is a fully covered edition. So you could also get editions that have only some pages colored. And the story is, we are in, basically modern America, and some people just fall asleep and never wake up, so they go into this prolonged type of sleep, and nobody knows why, and nobody knows how to wake them up. And Gaiman, like in a lot of his story, brings this together with myths, legends, folk stories, not to kind of like weave this story of the Sandman. Another author who is quite prolific when it comes to graphic novels is Nedi Okorafor. Nedi Okorafor is an author who writes very much Afrofuturism. She writes conventional novels, but she also writes texts for graphic novels. And again, the text only exists in the graphic novel, so there isn't a novel this is based on. I have as my example here Guardia, which is about people immigrating to America. It's named after the LaGuardia airport in New York. And for this, the art was done by Tana Ford, and the colors by James Devlin, and the letterer is Sal Cipriano. And if we have a look at inside again, so you can see a little bit of the art style here. I think it's done quite well because we are talking mostly African American characters in this book, and it's not so much that the African Americans are the only immigrants to America, but we also have aliens, and yeah, Okorafor uses the aliens to highlight issues that American immigrants might have. It also has a second kind of like story level, so to say. It's a little bit also eco-fiction that's woven into this. So yeah, overall quite interesting, and again an example where we have an author supplying a text that's then put into this visual form by a whole team of people. And then my next and also last example is this one here, Isabel Greenberg. This is a little bit different again, because here we don't have a group of people to come up with this graphic novel, but Isabel Greenberg has done text and art for this. So she basically does both things for this novel. And when we look inside, her art style is quite different. It's similar for other graphic novels that she has done, where we have black and white that is then teamed up with primary colors. So in this spread we have some blues, but other are more showing more yellow, like this one here. No, you can see it's more on the yellow scale, and some have predominantly red, like this one here, for example. When it comes to the story of this graphic novel, this is in some parts, but only in some parts, a retelling of the Arabian Nights story. No? So 100 Nights of Hero. When it comes to the story of this graphic novel, this is in parts a retelling of the Arabian Nights. So we have the same setup where we have Scheherazade, who tells a story each night, to basically save her life and save the life of other people at her court. But this comes also with a bit of a gender twist. And I won't tell you more about it. You will really have to read 100 Days of Hero to find out, because otherwise that would really be spoiling it quite a bit. Yeah, okay, so this is my roundup for this particular video. I hope you enjoyed this a little bit. And yeah, until the next video, happy reading.